Vandehang Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalang Sri Gurun Vaishnavangscha Sri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunathan Vitang Tang Sajivam Sadvaitang Savadhutang Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devang Sri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Sri Vishakhan Vitangscha Krishna 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 Hey Krishna 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 Hey Krishna 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 Rakshamam Krishna 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 Pahimam Rama Raghava Rama Raghava Rama Raghava Rakshamam Krishna Keshava Krishna Keshava Krishna Keshava Pahimam Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Preshtaya Uttale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swamin Iti Namine Namaste Saraswate Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhara Srivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Nama Krishna Yadavaya Namaha Gopala Govinda Rama Sri Madhusudana Om Apavitra Pavitro Va Sarva Avastang Gatopi Va Yat Smaret Pundarika Akshang Sabhaya Abhyantara Shuchihi Sri Vishnu Sri Vishnu Sri Vishnu Om Ajnana Timarandasya Jnana Anjana Shalakaya Chakshu Unmilitang Yena Tasmai Sri Gurave Namaha Mukhaṁ karoti vachalam pangam langhayate girim Yat kripatamahang vande Sri Gurung Dinataranam Yat kripatamahang vande Parama Ananda Madhavam Trinadapi Sunichena Tarar Iva Sahishnuna Amanina Manadena Kirtaniya Sadahari Hare Nama Hare Nama Hare Nama eva kevalam kalo nasjiva gatir anyata. Guru mukha padma vakya chitete koriya aikya arna koriho mane asha. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So tonight we're going to study 3 scenes. The first one is entitled, How One Can Be More Foolish. The personified Vedas continue to offer prayers to the Supreme Lord. From the subject matter under discussion, we can gain a clear understanding of the difference between the impersonalists and the personalists. Prabhupada now explains. The impersonal conception recommends merging into the existence of the Supreme, and the voidist philosophy recommends making all material varieties void. Both of these philosophies are known as Mayavad. Certainly, the cosmic manifestation comes to a close and becomes void when the living entities merge into the body of Narayana to rest until another creation. And so this may be called an impersonal condition. But these conditions are never eternal. The cessation of variegatedness of the material world and the merging of the living entities into the body of the Supreme are not permanent, because the creation will once again take place, and the living entities who merged into the body of the Supreme without having developed their full Krishna consciousness will once again appear in this material world as soon as there is another creation. The Bhagavad Gita confirms this fact. Bhuta grama sa evayang bhutva praliyate ratri agame avasha partha prabhatvati ahar agame. This material world is created and annihilated, and this is going on perpetually. And conditioned souls who are without Krishna consciousness come back again and again whenever the material creation is manifest. If such conditioned souls take advantage of this opportunity and develop Krishna consciousness under the direct instruction of Lord Krishna, then they are transferred to the spiritual world and do not have to come back again to the material creation. It is said, therefore, in Srimad Bhagavatam, Yenye Ravandaksha Vimukta Maninas Twai Astad Bhavad Avishuddha Buddhaya Ahrujya Krishtrena Parang Padang Tata Patanti Adho Nadrita Yushmad Angrayaha. The voidists and impersonalists are not very intelligent because they do not take shelter under the lotus feet of Lord Krishna. Because they are less intelligent, these voidists and impersonalists take to different types of austerities, either to attain the stage of nirvana, which means finishing the material conditions of life, or to attain oneness by merging into the body of Lord Krishna. But all of them again fall down eventually because they have neglected the lotus feet of Lord Krishna. In Chaitanya Charitamrita, the author, Krishna-das Kaviraj Goswami, after studying all the Vedic literature and hearing from all authorities, has given his opinion. Ekale Ishwar Krishna Ar Saba Mritya Jare Aiche Nachai Setaiche Kare Nritya. Krishna-das Kaviraj concludes that Krishna is the only supreme master and that all living entities are Krishna's eternal servants. Krishna-das Kaviraj Goswami's statement is confirmed in these prayers by the personified Vedas. The conclusion is, therefore, that everyone is under the control of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Everyone is serving under the supreme direction of Lord Krishna, and everyone is afraid of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. It is out of fear of Krishna that all activities are being rightly executed. Everyone's position is to be subordinate to the Supreme Lord. Yet, at the same time, Lord Krishna has no partiality in his view of the living entities. Krishna is just like the unlimited sky. As the sparks of a fire dance in the fire, similarly, all living entities are like birds flying in the unlimited sky. Some of them are flying very high, some are flying at a lesser altitude, and some are flying at still a lesser altitude. The different birds are flying in different positions according to their respective abilities to fly. But the sky has nothing to do with this ability. Lord Krishna also confirms this in Bhagavad Gita in the 4th chapter, where Krishna says, Ye yatha mang prapadyante tangs tataiva bhajami aham mama vartmanu vartante manushya partha sarvasha. Krishna says that he awards different positions to different living entities according to their proportionate surrender. This proportionate reward by the personality of Godhead to the living entities is not his partiality. Therefore, in spite of the living entities being situated in different positions, in different spheres, and in different species of life, all of them are always under the control of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And yet, Krishna is never responsible for their different living conditions. This is definitely stated by Krishna in the 5th chapter of Gita. Nadate kasyachit papang nachaiva sukritang vibhu agyanena vritang gyanam tena muhyanti jantava. The Supreme Lord the Supreme Lord never assumes anyone's sinful or pious activities. Embodied beings, however, are bewildered because of the ignorance which covers their real knowledge. In conclusion, it is simply foolish and artificial, therefore, to think oneself equal to the Supreme Lord. And it is still more foolish to think that one has not seen God. Everyone is seeing God in his different aspects, The only difference is that the theist sees God as the Supreme Personality, the most beloved, Krishna, while the atheist sees the Absolute Truth as ultimate death. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Scene 20 is entitled The Difference Between the Two Dhruvas. The personified Vedas continued to pray. Our dear Lord Krishna, from all Vedic information, it is to be understood that you are the supreme controller and all living entities are controlled. Prabhupada now comments. The Katha Upanishad says, Nityo Nityanam Chaitanas Chaitananam Eko Bahunang Yo Vididhati Kaman Tang Pita Gangye Anupashyanti Dhiras Teshang Shanti Shasvati Netaresham. Both Lord Krishna and the living entities are called Nitya, eternal. And so they are both qualitatively one. Yet the singular Nitya, or the Supreme Lord, is the controller, whereas the plural Nityas are controlled. The individual controlled living entity resides within the body, and the Supreme Controller, as Supersoul, is also present there. But the Supersoul is controlling the individual soul. That is the verdict of the Vedas. For if the individual soul were not controlled by the Supersoul, then how could one explain the Vedic version that a living entity transmigrates from one body to another, enjoying and suffering the effects of one's past deeds? Sometimes one is promoted to a higher standard of life, and sometimes one is degraded to a lower standard of life. Thus, the conditioned souls are not only under the control of the Supreme Lord, but they are also conditioned by the control of material nature. This relationship of the living entities to the Supreme Lord as the controlled and the controller definitely proves that although the Supersoul is all-pervasive, the individual living entity himself is not all-pervasive. If the individual soul was all-pervasive, there would be no question of being controlled. The theory that the Supersoul and the individual soul are equal is therefore a polluted conclusion, and no sensible person accepts it. Rather, one should try to understand the distinctions between the Supreme Eternal and the subordinate eternals. The personified Vedas therefore concluded, O Lord, both you and the limited dhruvas, or living entities, are eternal. The form of the unlimited eternal is sometimes calculated as the universal form, and in the Vedic literatures like the Upanishads, the form of the limited eternal is vividly described. It is said therein as follows: Keshagra shata bhagasya shatangsha sadrishatmakaha jiva sukshma swarupo yang Sankyatito hi chit kana. The original spiritual form of the living entity is 1/10,000th the size of the tip of a hair. It is stated that Brahman, spirit, is greater than the greatest and smaller than the smallest. The individual living entities who are eternally part and parcel of God are smaller than the smallest. With our material senses, we can perceive neither the Supreme, who is greater than the greatest, nor the individual soul, who is smaller than the smallest. We have to understand both the greatest and the smallest from the authoritative sources of Vedic literature. The Vedic literature states that the Supersoul is sitting within the body of a living entity and is as big as a thumb. The argument, therefore, may be put forward: how can something the size of a thumb be accommodated within the heart of an ant? The answer is that this thumb measurement of the Supersoul is imagined in proportion to the body of the living entity. In all circumstances, therefore, the Supersoul and the individual living entity cannot be taken as one, although both of them enter within the material body of a living entity. The Supersoul living within the heart is therefore directing or controlling the individual living entity. Although both are dhruva or eternal, the living entity is always under the direction of the Supreme. And so it may be argued that because the living entities are born from material nature, then they are all equal and independent. However, in the Vedic literature, it is said, specifically in Bhagavad Gita, Sarva yonishu kaunteya murtaya sambhavanti ya tasang brahma mahad yonir ahang bija prada pita. The Supreme Personality of Godhead impregnates material nature with the living entities, then they come out. Therefore, the appearance of the individual living entities is not factually due to material nature alone, just as a child produced by a woman is not independent in her production. A woman is first impregnated by a man, and then a child is produced. As such, the child produced by the woman is also part and parcel of the man. So in the same way, the living entities are apparently produced by material nature, but not independently, for it is due to the impregnation of material nature by the Supreme Father, Krishna, that the living entities are present. Therefore, the argument that the individual living entities are not part and parcel of the Supreme cannot stand. For example, the different parts and parcels of the body cannot be taken as equal to the whole. Rather, the whole body is the controller of the different limbs. Similarly, the parts and parcels of the Supreme Whole are always dependent and are always controlled by the source of the parts and parcels, as it is confirmed by Krishna in Bhagavad Gita. Mamai vangsho jiva loke jiva bhuta sanatanaha manakshashtan indriyani prakriti sthani karshati. The living entities are part and parcel of Krishna. Mama eva angsha. No sane man or woman, therefore, will accept the theory that the supersoul and the individual soul are of the same category. They are equal only in quality, but quantitatively, the supersoul is always the supreme, and the individual soul is always subordinate to the supersoul. That is the conclusion of the Vedas. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. This final scene for today is entitled Eternal Individuality. Two significant words used in this connection is Yanmaya and Chinmaya. In Sanskrit grammar, the word mayat is used in the sense of transformation and also in the sense of sufficiency. The Mayavadi philosophers interpret that the words Yanmaya or Chinmaya indicate that the living entity is always equal to the Supreme. But one has to consider whether this affix, mayat, is used for sufficiency or for transformation. The living entity never possesses anything exactly in the same proportion as the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Therefore, this mayat affix cannot be used to mean that the individual living entity is self-sufficient. The individual living entity never has sufficient knowledge. Otherwise, how could one have come under the control of Maya, or the material energy? The word sufficient can be accepted, therefore, only in proportion to the magnitude of the living entity. The spiritual oneness of the Supreme Lord and the living entities is never to be accepted as homogeneity. Each and every living entity is individual. If homogeneous oneness is accepted, then by the liberation of one individual soul, all other individual souls would have been liberated immediately. But the fact is that every individual soul is differently enjoying and suffering in the material world. The word mayat is also used in the sense of transformation, or sometimes it is also used to mean byproduct. The impersonalist theory is that Brahman himself has accepted different types of body, and that is his lila or pastime. There are, however, many hundreds and thousands of species of life in different standards of living conditions. They are found as either human beings, demigods, animals, birds, beasts, etc. And if all of them were expansions of the Supreme Absolute Truth, then there would be no question of liberation, because Brahman is already liberated. Another interpretation put forward by the Mayavadis is that in every millennium, different types of bodies are manifest, And when the millennium is closed, all the different bodies or expansions of Brahman automatically become one, ending all different manifestations. Then, in the next millennium, according to the theory, Brahman again expands into different bodily forms. So if we accept this theory of the Maya bodies, then Brahman becomes subject to change. But this cannot be accepted. From Vedanta Sutra, we understand that Brahman is by nature joyful. Brahman cannot therefore change himself into a body which is subject to painful conditions. Actually, the living entities who are part and parcel of Brahman are infinitesimal particles prone to be covered by the illusory energy. As explained before, the particles of Brahman are like sparks blissfully dancing within a fire. But there is a chance of their falling from the fire into smoke, although smoke is nothing but another condition of fire. This material world is just like smoke, and the spiritual world is just like a blazing fire. The innumerable living entities are prone to fall down to the material world from the spiritual world when influenced by the illusory energy. And it is also possible for the living entity to once again become liberated when, by the cultivation of real knowledge, one becomes completely freed from the contamination of the material world. The theory of the demons or asuras is that the living entities are born of material nature or prakriti, in touch with the Purusha. But this theory also cannot be accepted because both the material nature and the Supreme Personality of Godhead are eternally existing. Neither the material nature nor the Supreme Personality of Godhead can be born. The Supreme Lord is known as Aja, or unborn, and that is stated in both Gita and Bhagavatam. Similarly, the material nature is also called Aja. So both the terms Aja and Aja mean unborn. As water in contact with air sometimes presents innumerable bubbles, so a combination of material nature and the Supreme Person causes the appearance of the living entities within this material world. As bubbles in the water appear in different shapes, similarly the living entities also appear in the material world in different shapes and conditions, influenced by the modes of material nature. As such, it is not improper to conclude that the living entities appearing within this material world in different shapes, such as human beings, demigods, animals, birds, beasts, etc., all get their respective bodies due to different desires. Now, no one can say when such desires were awakened in them, and therefore it is said, Anadi Karma, the cause of such material existence is untraceable. No one knows when one's material life began, but it is a fact that it does have a point of beginning, because originally Every living entity is a spiritual spark. As sparks falling onto the ground from a fire have a beginning, similarly, the living entities coming to this material world have a beginning. But no one can say when. Even during the time of dissolution, these living entities remain merged in the spiritual existence of Lord Krishna as if in deep sleep. But their original desires to lord it over the material nature do not subside. So again, when there is a cosmic manifestation, they come out to fulfill the same desires, and therefore they appear in different species of life. This merging into the Supreme at the time of dissolution is compared to honey. In the honeycomb, the tastes of different flowers and fruits are conserved. When one drinks honey, one cannot distinguish what sort of honey has been collected from what sort of flower. But the palatable taste of the honey presupposes that the honey is not homogeneous, but rather is a combination of different tastes. Another example is that although different rivers ultimately mix with the water of the sea, that does not mean that the individual identities of the river are thereby lost. Although the water of the Ganga and the Yamuna mixes with the water of the sea, the river Ganga and river Yamuna still continue to exist independently. In the same way, the merging of different living entities into Brahman at the time of dissolution involves the dissolution of different types of bodies. But the living entities, along with their different tastes, remain individually submerged in Brahman until another manifestation of the material world. Just as the salty taste of seawater and the sweet taste of Ganga water are different, and this difference continuously exists, so the difference between the Supreme Lord and the living entities also continually exists, even though it appears that at the time of dissolution they merge. The conclusion is, therefore, that even when the living entities become free from all contamination of material conditions, they merge into the spiritual kingdom, for still their individual tastes in relationship with the Supreme Lord continues to exist. Namaste Narasimhaya. Namaste Narasimhaya. Praklad Aklad Dayane. Hiranya Kashi Puravaksha. Shilatangana Kalaye. Ito Nrsinga Parato Nrsinho. Yato Yato Yamitato Nrsinha. Bahir Nrsinga Hridaye Nrsinho. Nrsingham Ading Sharanang Prapadye. Tavakara Kamala Bare Nakam Adbhuta Sringam Dalita Hiranyakashipu Tanubringam Keshavadrita Narahadi Rupa Jai Jagadisha Hare Jai Jagadisha Hare Jai Jagadisha Hare Keshavadrita Narsingha Rupa Jai Jagadisha Hare Jai Jagadisha Hare Jai Jagadisha Hare Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Om Tat Sat. Very good. Life goes on day after day. Hearts torn in every way. So chant the Maha Mantra, 'cause this sound is absolute, the name of God. People, they rush everywhere, each with their own secret care. So chant the Maha Mantra and always try to hear the name of God. In every town and village, the holy name will sound. Lord Gauranga is calling you. Yes, you were lost, now you're found. So I'll continue to say, I hope that you always will pray. Just chant the Maha Mantra, 'cause this sound is so sublime. The names of God, the names of God, the names of God. Now we can all sing. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. The names of God, the names of God. Thank you very much for allowing me this ecstasy. You are too kind to me. Thank you, and thank you. All right, everyone can unmute, and we can have our Ishtagosti.